All right, let's get started. We're going to dive deep into the data behind what's known as the Manosphere. It's this massive, sprawling network of online communities, and what we're really interested in today is how it's evolving, and more importantly, what that might mean for all of us. So, here's our game plan. First, we'll quickly define what we even mean by the Manosphere. Then, we'll let the data do the talking and see how it's all changed over time. We'll trace how users are moving between these communities and how that seems to be connected to a rise in toxicity. And finally, we'll zoom out and talk about the real-world impact of all these online trends. Okay, so before we can really dig into the data, we need to make sure we're all on the same page. Let's establish a shared vocabulary for who exactly we're talking about. The term manosphere itself popped up around 2009, and it's important to know it's not some single unified group. Think of it more like a loose network of different communities, forums, blogs, and especially subreddits, which are basically just forums on Reddit. The common threads are an anti-feminist viewpoint and a focus on men's issues. Now, sociologists have broken this down into four main groups. You've got the older communities like men's rights activists, or MRAs, who are focused on legal and political change, and pickup artists, PUAs, who teach seduction techniques. Then you have the newer, more online native groups, men go in their own way, MGTO, who are all about male separatism, and involuntary celibates, or incels, who are really defined by their frustration and anger over a lack of romantic relationships. So what's the glue that holds these pretty different groups together? Well, it's this idea of taking the red pill. And yes, that is a direct reference to the Matrix. For them, it means waking up to what they believe is a hidden truth, that society is fundamentally biased against men. This shared belief in a kind of secret knowledge is a really powerful force that connects this entire ecosystem. So how has the manosphere actually evolved over the years? This is where the data tells a really fascinating story. A huge study, we're talking nearly 29 million online posts, shows this dramatic power shift. Basically, what used to be kind of on the fringes is now becoming much more mainstream within the manosphere, and the groups that were once dominant are starting to fade away. And this chart, wow, it just brings that data to life. It's tracking activity for more than a decade. You can literally see how the older PUA forums, that's the green line, and the MRA communities in purple have really dropped off in relative popularity. And at the same time, you see this dramatic rise in the newer MGTO and incel subreddits, the brown and black lines, especially taking off after 2016. We can pretty much break this whole story down into three acts. First, you have the PUA and MRA era, when those older groups really defined the space. Then, around 2012, MGTO and the Red Pill subreddit start to take off. And that leads us to the modern era, where these newer and frankly more extreme incel and MGTO communities have become the most active and popular groups by far. Now, this big shift, it didn't just happen by accident. The data shows us a really clear pattern of users actually moving from one of these online communities to another. And this is so important because it gives us a window into how people might be gradually drawn toward more extreme ideologies. By tracking user activity across all these different online communities, year after year, the research can literally map out the pathways people took as they moved through the manosphere. You see, these online communities aren't isolated islands. They're all connected. The growth of the newer, more extreme groups was pretty much fueled by a flood of users coming over from the older ones. They didn't just spring up out of thin air. This chart really helps us visualize those pathways. Just think of it like a travel map, right? Each box shows how many users moved from a source community to a destination one. So for example, look at the MRA to MGTOW chart. That blue line shows that in the early days of the MGTOW subreddit, more than 30% of its users had been active in MRA communities just the year before. That's a huge influx. So the data reveals these really clear migration routes. You see people moving from men's rights activists to MGTO, from pickup artists to the Red Pill community, and lately from MGTO toward incel groups. The connection between MRAs and MGTO was especially tight. At one point, there was an 87% user overlap. Incredible. And this migration, it's not just about people changing what they call themselves online. Researchers found that this whole evolution goes hand in hand with another measurable trend, a really significant increase in toxic and misogynistic language. Using machine learning to analyze the language here, researchers found a super clear pattern. The very groups that grew the most through this migration, MGTW and incels, that's the brown and black lines again, are also measurably the most toxic and misogynistic. And you can see that huge spike in hateful language right after 2016. And this isn't just about anonymous comments online. This is the kind of rhetoric that gets shared with millions of followers. This quote from Justin Waller, who's a close associate of the influencer Andrew Tate, pretty much perfectly illustrates the kind of ideology that's being promoted. So, what does this all actually mean for the real world? As sociologists, this is where we get really interested. How are these online dynamics, this migration and this rising toxicity, spilling over into our day-to-day lives? The thing is, what happens in these online echo chambers doesn't stay there. Not anymore. We're seeing the influence of the manosphere pop up in our schools, in our communities, and even in our politics. The manosphere is having a real-world impact in a few critical ways. It's definitely amplifying sexism and misogyny, especially in schools. It's acting as a recruitment ground for isolated young men who are just looking for a community to belong to. And it's promoting these narratives that can, in the worst cases, be used to justify violence against women. All of this, of course, is being absolutely supercharged by social media algorithms that push this content to an even wider audience. So, if there's one key takeaway from this research, it's this. The manosphere isn't just a collection of separate online clubs. It's a living, dynamic ecosystem that's always evolving. And the clear migration we see from the milder groups to the more extreme ones, well, it strongly suggests that this may be functioning as a kind of radicalization pathway. And that leaves us with a pretty critical question, doesn't it? If these online communities are, in fact, pathways to extremism, where do they lead next? And maybe more importantly, what can we do